Katie and I are both happy to be here. Both of us this time, 2-for-1 deal. It's Mental Health Awareness Month. My sense of the world is that our lives ought to be mental health awareness lives. The human condition is indeed a strange one. We are knowers. We seek truth. We are aware of our own mortality. Yet of it we seem to know very little. We shrink from the word death, often substituting euphemisms. Yet it remains there, implacable, unapproachable, unknowable, but unfortunately inevitable. Strangely, that is itself a truth. The opening today is a poem by Walt Whitman, and it's a good start, for he tells us in it of our condition, at our beginning, and to be sure, many times throughout our own lives. It's entitled, A Noiseless, Patient Spider. It's been you before, and maybe it's you today. We'll see. A noiseless, patient spider. I marked where on a little promontory it stood isolated. Marked how to explore the vacant, vast surrounding. It launched forth filament out of itself, ever unreeling them, ever tirelessly speeding them. And you, O my soul, where you stand, surrounded, detached in measureless oceans of space, ceaselessly musing, venturing, throwing, seeking the spheres to connect them, till the bridge you need will be formed, till the ductile anchor hold, till the gossamer thread you fling catch somewhere. Oh, my soul. That's Walt Whitman. Kindness. And for your families being here, too. Trying to understand ourselves, embedded like Whitman's spider in vacant, vast surroundings and measureless oceans of space, we try often to catch hold of something, call it a feeling, and then if we're lucky, to sense in it what it's like to be alive in this skin, in this moment. And then we try to describe it before, like a dream we've just left, the feeling vanishes and we're now back to the start, fully awake. Burning the midnight oil, fully awake, writing this sermon, I was hoping to find a more direct way to dissect the human condition. This is a big ask, I grant you that, to get where poetry takes us emotively, but to try to do it more intellectually or analytically, or at any rate, differently. To find a new model to tease out the tenderness and awe that we feel when we reflect on ourselves and on the human condition. To speak of our awareness of our fragility and anxiety and tentativeness, of our own determination and self-regard and love for others. And then finally, of the wonder and bewilderment flowing from this awareness. The poetic meets the inevitable. The metaphoric meets the physical. The human condition is not tragic, but it is certainly strange. Strange enough that humanities might be surprised that there's anybody out there who's not clinically depressed. It's not us, it's the condition. There must surely be a workable way to face it, one where all the parts work together to generate meaning in a kind of positive feedback loop, where we can live moment by moment immersed in our awareness, our humanness, and yet also take comfort that we can live lives that are consciously rewarding. I got into the matter in reading Iris Murdoch, a British philosopher and author whose literary life led to acclaim and awards before her rather public decline with Alzheimer's led to her death in 1999. You might have seen a movie that memorialized her entitled Iris. Consider this. In her Nuns and Soldiers, Gertrude is married to Guy, who in his early 40s is dying of cancer. The book opens with Guy on his deathbed, sometimes rambling, sometimes making great sense. After his death, Gertrude reconnects with a school friend, Anne, and together they take a short trip. Here's how Iris Murdoch puts it when Gertrude returns from the trip to what had been Guy's and her flat. Now simply her flat. Gertrude looked about her, putting the key in the door. She had felt sick, ready to faint. It was really beginning now, her life without Guy. The rest had been an interlude. She had, with quiet, self-regarding prudence, changed the flat a good deal before she had left on her trip. She did not want to come back to the exact scene which she had made and lived in with Guy. She did not want that terrible absence to spring upon her once again. But what struck her now was how unchanged it all was. In the absence, it was there. That special form of Guy, dead, which belonged in the flat and now appeared again, claiming its tribute of a grief renewed. These are the words that Murdoch chose to describe this feeling. Gertrude is the spider now, venturing on, launching her filament to see where it might catch hold. Guy's death meets Gertrude's life. Having one stand up against the other, such as this, lets us sit in the feeling of her grief, Gertrude's. For as long as Murdoch will stay with it, as long as she'll keep writing the words that tell us how she feels, what she sees, what's there, what's not. It's a beautifully long look at something that, unlike a dream, does not go away but stays put, page after page, letting you walk around it and take its measure. Grief, seen this way, can be the instantiation, the darkness visible of what we're trying to describe in the first place. To me, it comes close to capturing what it means to be alive. Perhaps its essence is the very present awareness of our love for another, our love for something, regardless of the pain. We would not give up the love to avoid the pain. Guy's death, Gertrude's life. Iris Murdoch's putting them together, it seems to me, is life-affirming. That's part one. Part two, now take another step. Take Guy out of Murdoch's equation and replace it with you, with your death. Your death, your life. This model says to us, yes, I know you can't explain why you're here, and yes, you can't square the wonder of life with the fact that you must die, but imagine this anyway. Imagine you could reflect, like Gertrude, on your own death. To do this intellectually at first, imagine that you had decided as a response to a personal struggle to die a suicide. But then you didn't. You're still alive. We can stand up your own life against your own concept of death. This is not, I hurry to say, a suggestion to simply summon up some more moxie, some of the old school win one for the Gipper positivism. That would be an insult. And it's different, this. The juxtaposition of these alternatives can be life-affirming. As we ponder our lives, as we find ourselves using the poet's language to describe the indescribable, words like ineffable or transcendent or ephemeral or mystical, we find it difficult to stay with, to stay in our pondering. Instead, we very understandably opt out. We begin dinner or call a friend or grab a book. Having a secure hold on the immeasurable magic of life this very moment and taking sustenance from it are themselves, well, evanescent events. They come and go. Evanescent. These are the words that you cannot get through divinity school without. And yet they don't mean more to me now than they did before. I'm trying to put some flesh on them. Evanescent, as you see, it's tough to forsake using poets' words to talk about what's really before us. It's understandable. Our lives are the subject of contingencies beyond our control, beyond anyone's. Constructs that gave us meaning fall away. Our daily routine becomes not enough. Suddenly everything is glossed with amazement or horror. Is what I'm really doing meaningless now? This seems so surreal. Is life worth the struggle now? Stepping outside of ourselves, if we can, might work. Maybe that puts us back to Murdoch. We can make our own meaning as we go. We can live our lives meaningfully by being conscious of the very difficulties day by day. Was there a book called One Bird at a Time? Something like that. And in doing so, this day by day, we can gain a sense of unity, of structure that can be the meaning we seek. Maybe this can be a positive feedback loop itself. We become happy, maybe even proud of our awareness of how we are indeed able to make it up as we go along. Are there alternatives? Is there a script somewhere? Some people profess to have a script in front of them, a plan even. If so, I'm looking for it. But I doubt that it's there. But we are able to make it up as we go along. We are just like Gertrude, articulating to herself how she feels in that very moment when she returns to her empty flat. She's saying it to herself. Our survival means that we are there to do it. We do not resent the necessity of having to make it up as we go along. It is the way things are. We're willing to face the future as if, unknowable as it is, it were opportunity incarnate. Even if we're fearful, it isn't. This is not a madcap approach. It is, I think, a responsible way to be in light of what is knowable. It means that we are adaptable, innovative. We think things through. We are appropriately wary of the future and genuinely happy about the resources we've gleaned with great effort from the past. We have prepared for the worst, but we are free to like being alive. But what if you don't feel that way? A lot of this sounds like a tough order. There are many examples of people who didn't feel that way and who, having thought about it, expressed contrary feelings. So here I seek to bring forward a couple thousand years worth of civilization by reciting something from Cato, who 2,000 years ago said he did not care to live in this deranged world, that it wasn't an honorable way to live, and that he would therefore, as it's translated, take my leave. I recall a Cato in a Peter Sellers movie as well. Much better Cato. What was that? It was the Return of the Pink Panther, I think. Yeah. Ivan, just to bring things up to date, and the brothers Karamazov told God that if he existed, I respectfully turn in my ticket. Well, that's the front porch for this proposition. Once these options are taken seriously, a curious thing happens. To be or not to be becomes a real choice, where before you were stuck with to be, and thus with your pain. Your choice then was how to be least painfully. And of course, there are many unfortunate answers there. But now in your pain, you're really serious. If you elect the suicide option, what happens then? Walker Percy in Lost in the Cosmos writes about this question, about the your life, your death equation as a useful fundamental model for your own self-awareness. So what happens next if you elect this option, he asks. And as he explains, very little indeed. To be sure, those remaining, many are hurt, many terribly, many irreparably. But for you, just for you, very little happens indeed. This is, of course, a purposeful understatement here. What Walker Percy says is nothing happens afterwards. This is, I underscore what I'm saying here, about you and you alone. I do not diminish the pain and damage of those who survive. That's the point about trying to do this intellectually, is to try to fence off just a small set piece for your consideration. So now all that stress and anxiety was for nothing. Sure, people talk, they are shocked, they miss you for a while, they resent your departure, your creditors are displeased. But in a surprisingly short period of time, everyone is back in the same rut. Now instead, consider the alternative. You can do it, but you decide not to. You are dispensed. Why not live instead of dying? You are free to do so. You are like a prisoner released from the cell of his life. You notice that the door to the cell is ajar and the sun is shining outside. Why not take a walk down the street? Where you might have been dead, you are alive. The sun is shining, you feel like a castaway on an island. You can't believe your good fortune. You were taken in by islanders who, it turns out, are worried sick themselves over boredom, anxiety, status, depression. And here you are lying on the beach. You are free for the first time to consider the folly of the human condition. Then consider the incredible difficulty of making meaning out of it. You've been thrust into this world as a child. Not even yet a child. An infant. With things to do and requirements imposed on you. A path, a course. And of course, for many, it's well laid out. On the other hand, if you go to your psychiatrist, you end up talking about your caregivers or your parents. You talk about the path that was there before you. Even when the path is wonderful, even when we can see that much, much later, sometimes in the middle we can't. So why didn't we get a different path? So this is at least part of the difficulty of making meaning out of chaos, is that sometimes we're not very good students of our own past. You are free now, however, for the first time to pick up a shell on the beach and look at it. You are free to go home and, like the man from Chicago, dance with your wife. You have nothing to lose from being alive. You have the option of being dead, but it's good to be here. You can laugh. You can go to work because you don't have to. Part 3. Have you ever wondered why in the 15th century, when Columbus and others were sailing all over the world in very small wooden ships held together by pegs and moved by sails, larded with unrefrigerated food on voyages in uncharted waters to destinations filled with unknown pestilence, why would anybody sign on to such an excursion? Was signing on as a sailor to sail into the unknown a bit like the decision we just talked about? The one not to commit suicide, not to die that way, but to live instead? Staying in the 15th century cities was itself a death of sorts, and living on the high seas was the better part of the few choices on offer. As a dweller in those cities, you could resort to strong drink. You could try to wring control of the world from chaos and somehow fix God and the angels so they were on your side. You could pray, or you could cast spells, or you could set sail. Religion and magic were as indistinguishable one from the other as were science and magic. Death was always at hand. We shouldn't probably be heard to complain too much here about it. There was nothing to buffer the individual from fatal disaster. There was no insurance. Sudden death could whisk you before God for an eternal judgment without any chance of confession or forgiveness. Hell gaped, its torments graphically illustrated for you in color on the walls of the local parish church. Thinking about death meant believing in magic, and magic meant that you could avoid the inevitability of death altogether. Not surprisingly, this idea clung to religion closely. And so saints in heaven took an interest in affairs down below, in crops and animals, and if the saints were not appeased, they might turn nasty. Candles and offerings kept them sweet, and a sprinkling of holy water kept baser spirits away from the cradle and the marriage bed. The devil and death were shockingly close to every minute of your life. Is this thinking still with us? And if so, does it by itself create anxiety in your life, the life you are living now? In other words, would thinking about the certainty of your own death be much less troubling today if we could leave behind all the magical thinking that hundreds of years ago was just part of the baggage? We could then be set free, just as our man who felt happy to pick up a seashell and to see that the sun was shining, and to be nothing more than who we are. We could see how fortunate we are to be here. Now, I'm trying to make that really mean something. It sounds like something you might find on the back of a cereal box. I hope you're not sitting there thinking that. If so, I'll be back soon. For the really good part comes next. We could, sometimes you don't know how this stuff sounds until you say it out loud in front of a group of people. Well, we could see how rewarding the effort can be to derive meaning for ourselves out of the chaos that confronts us. We could see how productive they could be lived with the certainty that the human condition is indeed strange. It is much the better part of coming to terms with our own mortality to form the habit of having death continually present, to confront it and all its strangeness and its certainty. That's the problem, and the solution, as difficult, as strange as it seems. It is to make dying our profession. To go back a ways, Seneca said to learn how to die is to learn how to live. Seeking to escape death is to remain unfree, enslaved. Instead, we should confront our fears, and in this we can find our freedom. If the human condition is strange, then it's only fitting that the seemingly morbid facing of death square on could lead us to self-control, serenity, courage, and even happiness. Let me finish in two ways. One fairly robust, the other slightly more delicate. The commitment to love that you make to a project or a pet or a person or yourself hands you a way of being that is not time limited. Love does not usher in a finite game for you that has rules and a whistle at the end, so you can stop and go back then to your real life. No, to love is to embark on an infinite game, one that's never over, one that pays dividends continuously. So you're never losing this game. It's never about to be over, and you're a little bit behind. Knowing that you're playing this game, what will be the only game you will ever play, your first and your last, I might add, makes you all the more committed to playing it as well as it can be played. This game that's been ushered in by love. Thus, you are more attentive. It's like the NBA players in the series at the end of the season. They just play a little more attentively. But when you are more attentive, then you are more alive. My more delicate ending is from a poem by Robert Frost entitled The Silken Tent. And it's a fitting counterpoint to Whitman's noiseless, patient spider, so overwhelmed with the universe. For Frost's poem answers Whitman's question whether our dreams will ever find a place to catch hold. The poem is only 14 lines, but it says a lot. It's kind of typically Frost. It says that we are bound together by countless silken ties of love. Listen how it implies so subtly that we are almost always unaware that these ties are actually doing anything for us. The ties. And in the poem, these are guys. G-U-Y-S. The guys mentioned in the poem are the ropes that are tied to the top of the central pole that, of course, holds everything up. Each tie, each guy is you, is your love. The tent is the construct we've made to protect ourselves from the universe's vacant, vast surrounding. This tent can be this congregation. It's us. See if you might agree. This is the silken tent. She is, as in a field, a silken tent at midday when a sunny summer breeze has dried the dew and all its ropes relent, so that in guise it gently sways at ease, and its supporting central cedar pole, that is its pinnacle to heavenward and signifies the sureness of the soul, seems to owe naught to any single cord, but strictly held by none, is loosely bound by countless silken ties of love and thought to everything on earth the compass round, and only by one's going slightly taut in the capriciousness of summer air is of the slightest bondage made aware. That's Robert Frost. Thank you. But I was going to say, and will say now, that as you leave the sanctuary today, consider a renewed commitment to reason as it is known to all of us, and to love as it is known to each of us. Go in peace after the postlude.